Imagine a civilization so powerful, its secrets have survived millennia. A kingdom where gods walked among men, and the world's greatest wonders were built in the shadows of the stars. But with all this power, ancient Egypt faced countless challenges. Wars, betrayals, and invasions from foreign lands, threatening to erase its legacy. For over 3,000 years, Egypt reigned supreme, but nothing lasts forever. Join us as we uncover the untold story of how this mighty civilization rose and ultimately fell. From the triumphs of legendary pharaohs to the dark battles that shook its very foundations, we're about to explore the challenges, the mysteries, and the extraordinary feats that defined Egypt's ancient past. This is the entire history of Egypt, and what you're about to witness is more than just stone and sand. Stay with us because the real story is far darker and far more complex than you ever imagined. Let's begin our journey and discover what happened when the greatest empire the world has ever seen crumbled into the dust. The origins and pre-dynastic Egypt. The history of ancient Egypt spans thousands of years, making it one of the longest-lasting civilizations in human history. To understand Egypt's rise, it's essential to look at its beginnings, long before the pyramids or pharaohs came into being. The early history of Egypt, known as pre-dynastic Egypt, provides a foundation for everything that followed. It was a time of slow but significant development that laid the groundwork for one of the most iconic and powerful civilizations in the ancient world. Early settlements and the development of agriculture. The story of Egypt begins in the prehistoric period, around 10,000 BCE. The earliest human settlements were scattered along the Nile River, which would later become the lifeblood of Egyptian civilization. The fertile banks of the Nile attracted early human populations because of its reliable water sources and abundant natural resources. However, it wasn't just the river that shaped the development of Egypt. The land's climate and geography played a key role as well. By the end of the last ice age, which ended around 8,000 BCE, the Sahara Desert began to dry out, and the climate of northeastern Africa became more suitable for the growth of crops. This period marked the transition from the Paleolithic era, the Old Stone Age, to the Neolithic era, the New Stone Age. With the rise of agriculture, humans in the Nile Valley began to settle in one place, rather than living as nomadic hunter-gatherers. This shift is often called the Neolithic Revolution, and it occurred in the Nile Valley around 7,000 BCE. The early Egyptians cultivated crops such as wheat, barley, and flax. They also raised livestock like cattle, goats, and sheep. These developments allowed for the growth of more permanent settlements. As these settlements grew, so did the complexity of society. Small villages along the Nile were formed, and people began to specialize in different crafts and trades, such as pottery, tool-making, and weaving. The social structure was still relatively simple, but it was beginning to develop the foundation for future complexity. The role of the Nile River. The Nile River was more than just a source of water. It was the lifeblood of ancient Egyptian civilization. The river provided a reliable means of transportation and communication across Egypt's vast stretches of land. It also flooded annually, depositing rich silt along its banks. This made the soil incredibly fertile, allowing for the cultivation of crops. For the ancient Egyptians, the Nile was not just a river. It was a divine force, a gift from the gods. The flooding of the Nile was central to the Egyptians' agricultural practices. Each year, around July, the river would flood, covering the surrounding lands with water and silt. The water would recede by October, leaving behind nutrient-rich soil that was perfect for planting. This annual cycle of flooding and retreating water was known as the inundation, and it formed the basis of the Egyptian agricultural calendar. Farmers in ancient Egypt would synchronize their planting and harvesting to the river's cycles. The Nile's impact on Egypt's social and political structure was profound. The steady and predictable flood cycle of the river ensured that food was plentiful, and this stability helped support a growing population. It also led to the formation of centralized power to manage the agricultural economy. As a result, early Egyptian communities started to unify under the rule of powerful leaders who could organize large-scale agricultural projects, such as irrigation systems and the management of food surpluses. The formation of early kingdoms. As the centuries passed, the small agricultural communities along the Nile began to grow into larger, more complex societies. By around 3100 BCE, two major regions began to emerge. Upper Egypt in the south, which stretched from the First Cataract to the area near Thebes, and Lower Egypt in the north, which included the fertile delta of the Nile. These two regions developed distinct cultures, languages, and customs, but they shared the same essential agricultural foundation. The unification of Upper and Lower Egypt is one of the most significant events in Egyptian history. The process of unification was gradual, involving a series of battles, alliances, and cultural exchanges. One of the earliest and most famous rulers to achieve this unification was King Narmer, also known as Menes. Narmer, who reigned around 3100 BCE, is often credited with founding the first dynasty of Egypt. The famous Narmer palette, an ancient ceremonial object found in Hierakonpolis, depicts King Narmer wearing the crowns of both Upper and Lower Egypt, symbolizing his control over both regions. The palette is one of the earliest and most important artifacts from this period and represents the first tangible evidence of the political unification of Egypt. Narmer's unification of Egypt was a pivotal moment that marked the beginning of Egypt's dynastic era, a period that would last for over 3,000 years. The early dynastic period. Following the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, the early dynastic period, circa 3100 to 2686 BCE, began. This era marked the beginning of the dynastic system, where rulers were recognized as divine kings or pharaohs. The pharaoh was not just a political leader, but also a religious figure believed to be the living god on earth, the intermediary between the gods and the people. During the early dynastic period, Egypt began to develop its distinctive cultural identity. The Egyptians built their first stone structures, including tombs and temples. These early monuments were often small compared to later ones, but they were significant in laying the groundwork for Egypt's future architectural achievements. The Step Pyramid of Djoser, built by the architect Imhotep during the Third Dynasty, is one of the earliest examples of monumental stone architecture. The Step Pyramid was a significant innovation, marking a departure from earlier mud-brick tombs and setting the stage for the construction of the famous pyramids of the Old Kingdom. The early dynastic period also saw the development of hieroglyphic writing, which became the primary script of the ancient Egyptians. The earliest examples of hieroglyphs appear on stone inscriptions from this period, including those found in the tombs of early pharaohs. Writing would play a central role in Egyptian administration, religion, and culture throughout the civilization's history. In addition to writing, the Egyptians made significant advances in other areas such as art, religion, and technology. The creation of a unified state allowed for the development of a more centralized government, with bureaucratic systems to manage resources, labor, and trade. The kings of this period built extensive trade networks with neighboring regions, including Nubia to the south and the Levant to the northeast. These trade routes brought valuable goods such as gold, silver, and exotic items, further enriching the early Egyptian economy. Religious beliefs and the rise of the divine pharaoh. Religion played a crucial role in the development of Egyptian civilization. The Egyptians believed in a vast pantheon of gods and goddesses, each responsible for different aspects of life and the cosmos. Central to their religious beliefs was the idea of Ma'at, the divine order of the universe. Ma'at was the concept of balance, harmony, and justice, and it was believed that the pharaoh was responsible for maintaining Ma'at on earth. The pharaoh's primary role was not only to govern the people, but also to ensure that Egypt's religious and cosmic order remained intact. The connection between the pharaoh and the divine was established early in Egyptian history. Pharaohs were seen as the living embodiment of the god Horus, and after their death, they were believed to become one with Osiris, the god of the afterlife. This divine kingship system was central to Egyptian culture and helped legitimize the authority of the rulers. As Egypt entered the early dynastic period, the religious and political institutions became more intertwined. Temples to the gods were built, and priests played a significant role in the administration of the state. The pharaohs would commission the construction of large temples to honor the gods, and these temples would become centers of power and influence in their own right. The Old Kingdom and the Age of the Pyramids. The early dynastic period laid the groundwork for one of the most remarkable eras in Egyptian history, the Old Kingdom. Spanning from approximately 2686 BCE to 2181 BCE, the Old Kingdom is often referred to as the Age of the Pyramids. This was the time when Egypt flourished under a strong central government, monumental construction projects, and the establishment of many of the practices that defined Egyptian civilization for millennia. The rise of the Old Kingdom. After the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt by King Narmer, Egypt saw a succession of powerful rulers. The early dynastic period eventually gave way to the Old Kingdom, which began with the Third Dynasty and is marked by the reign of Pharaoh Djoser. The Old Kingdom represented the pinnacle of Egypt's political and economic power, and it was during this time that the pharaohs truly solidified their authority. The centralization of power that began in the early dynastic period continued to grow in the Old Kingdom. The pharaoh was seen not just as a divine ruler, but also as the absolute authority in all matters of state. The king's role was both political and religious, and he was responsible for maintaining Ma'at, the cosmic order that ensured peace and prosperity for the land. The Old Kingdom saw a period of political stability, which allowed Egypt to focus on monumental projects and expanding its influence across the region. The rise of pyramid building. One of the defining features of the Old Kingdom was the construction of the Great Pyramids, which have become symbols of ancient Egypt's grandeur and technological expertise. The most famous of these is the Great Pyramid of Giza, built for Pharaoh Khufu during the Fourth Dynasty. The construction of the pyramid represented the culmination of centuries of architectural and engineering advancements, and it was part of a larger trend in the Old Kingdom to build elaborate tombs for the pharaohs. The idea of building large stone tombs had evolved over time. In the early dynastic period, the first step pyramid was built for Pharaoh Djoser by the architect Imhotep. This pyramid, located at Saqqara, is considered the first monumental stone structure in Egypt and marks a significant leap in architectural design. The step pyramid's design was a progression from earlier burial structures known as mastabas, which were flat-roofed, rectangular buildings that served as tombs for early rulers. However, it was under Pharaoh Sneferu, the fourth ruler of the Fourth Dynasty, that the first true pyramids were constructed. Sneferu is credited with building several pyramids, including the Bent Pyramid and the Red Pyramid. The Bent Pyramid is famous for its unusual shape. It begins with a steep angle, but then changes to a gentler slope midway through its construction. This architectural experiment ultimately led to the creation of the Red Pyramid, which is considered the first successful true pyramid. It was the first pyramid to have smooth sides and was the precursor to the Grand Pyramids of Giza. The Great Pyramid of Giza. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built for Pharaoh Khufu, also known as Cheops, is one of the most iconic and enduring symbols of ancient Egypt. Construction of the pyramid began around 2580 BCE, and it was completed over the course of 20 years. At the time of its completion, the Great Pyramid stood as the tallest man-made structure in the world, towering at 481 feet, 146 meters. A record it held for nearly 3,800 years. The Great Pyramid was constructed using millions of limestone blocks, each weighing several tons. The exact methods used to transport and position these massive stones are still the subject of much debate and speculation among historians and archaeologists. Various theories have been proposed, including the use of ramps, levers, and even the possibility of a spiral staircase inside the pyramid itself. The Great Pyramid was not just a tomb for the pharaoh. It was a symbol of his divine power and his journey to the afterlife. The pyramid was originally covered in smooth, white limestone casing stones, which would have reflected the sun's light, making it shine like a beacon. The pyramid complex also included temples, causeways, and smaller pyramids for the queen and other members of the royal family. The alignment of the pyramid with the cardinal points of the compass, as well as the precision with which it was built, showcases the advanced knowledge of astronomy, geometry, and engineering possessed by the ancient Egyptians. The construction of the Great Pyramid was not only a religious and political endeavor, but also a massive economic undertaking. It required a huge workforce of skilled laborers, craftsmen, and laborers who were likely organized into teams. While some early theories suggested that slaves built the pyramids, Modern archaeological evidence shows that the workers were likely paid laborers who lived in nearby workers' villages. These villages contained evidence of a well-fed and organized workforce, and the workers were provided with food, shelter, and medical care. The role of the pharaoh and the religious significance of the pyramids. The pharaoh's role as a divine ruler was central to the construction of the pyramids. The pyramids were not only tombs, but also symbolic representations of the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife. According to Egyptian belief, the pharaoh would ascend to the heavens and join the gods, particularly the sun god Ra, upon his death. The pyramid was seen as a means to facilitate this journey, allowing the pharaoh's soul to ascend and achieve immortality. The religious significance of the pyramids is reflected in the complex of rituals and ceremonies that surrounded their construction and use. Temples were built adjacent to the pyramids, where priests performed daily rituals to honor the pharaoh and ensure that his spirit was properly sustained in the afterlife. The most famous of these rituals was the opening of the mouth ceremony, which was performed on the pharaoh's tomb and statues to wake up his soul and enable him to communicate with the gods. In addition to the construction of tombs for the pharaohs, the Old Kingdom also saw the rise of private tombs for the elite. These tombs were often built with elaborate decorations, including scenes of the deceased's life, religious rituals, and offerings to the gods. These tombs reflected the growing belief in the afterlife and the importance of maintaining Ma'at even after death. Decline of the Old Kingdom. The Old Kingdom was a time of prosperity, but by the end of the 6th dynasty, Egypt began to experience political instability. The central authority of the pharaoh weakened, and regional governors, known as nomarchs, began to wield more power. These provincial leaders often acted independently, leading to conflicts and divisions within Egypt. The decline of the Old Kingdom is attributed to several factors, including economic difficulties, climate change, and internal strife. The Nile's annual floods became more erratic, affecting agricultural production, which in turn led to food shortages and unrest. As the power of the pharaohs diminished, the Old Kingdom came to an end, and Egypt entered a period of political fragmentation known as the First Intermediate Period. Despite its decline, the Old Kingdom left a lasting legacy in Egyptian history. The pyramids of Giza and the achievements of the Old Kingdom pharaohs remain symbols of Egypt's power and ingenuity. The religious and political practices that developed during this time laid the foundation for the subsequent periods of Egyptian history, ensuring that the civilization would continue to thrive for centuries to come. The First Intermediate Period and the Middle Kingdom. Following the decline of the Old Kingdom and the political fragmentation that ensued, Egypt entered a time of instability and division known as the First Intermediate Period, circa 2181 to 2055 BCE. This was a period marked by social unrest, regional rivalries, and a lack of centralized power. However, it also set the stage for a dramatic resurgence during the Middle Kingdom, circa 2055 to 1650 BCE, a time when Egypt regained its strength and established a new era of cultural and political unity. The First Intermediate Period, the struggle for power. The First Intermediate Period began with the collapse of the Old Kingdom. As the power of the pharaohs waned, Egypt's central authority crumbled, and the country was divided into competing regional powers. The pharaoh, once the undisputed ruler of Egypt, lost control of the provinces. Local governors, or nomarchs, rose to power and began to rule independently, leading to a fragmented and unstable Egypt. At the same time, economic troubles and climate change compounded the situation. The Nile's flooding, which had previously been predictable and reliable, became erratic, causing crop failures and widespread famine. This scarcity of food added to the social unrest. With the weakening of the central government, the once great civilization seemed on the brink of collapse. However, this period of fragmentation was not entirely without significance. It was a time of cultural and artistic development. Even though Egypt was divided, local rulers continued to commission works of art, literature, and architecture. One of the most notable achievements of the First Intermediate Period was the creation of the pyramid texts, which were written on the walls of royal tombs and served as instructions for the deceased king's journey to the afterlife. These texts would play a crucial role in the religious practices of later periods, particularly the Middle Kingdom. The rise of the Middle Kingdom. the reunification of Egypt. The first intermediate period lasted for over a century, but eventually, a powerful leader emerged to reunify Egypt. This leader was Mentuhotep II, a pharaoh of the 11th dynasty, who succeeded in restoring centralized authority around 2055 BCE. Mentuhotep II's reunification of Egypt marked the beginning of the Middle Kingdom, a period often regarded as a golden age in Egyptian history. Mentuhotep II's reign was significant not only for his political achievements, but also for his military conquests. He successfully brought the entire country under his control, uniting Upper and Lower Egypt once again. His military campaigns in the south against the powerful Nubians, and in the north to suppress regional uprisings, helped solidify his authority and restore stability to Egypt. The political stability that Mentuhotep II and his successors established allowed Egypt to experience a cultural renaissance. The Middle Kingdom saw the resurgence of large-scale building projects, with the construction of monumental temples, palaces, and tombs. The Temple of Karnak, dedicated to the god Ammonius, was one of the most important religious sites to emerge during this time, and the mortuary temple of Mentuhotep II is one of the most impressive examples of the architecture of the period. Administrative reforms and economic revival. One of the major accomplishments of the Middle Kingdom was the strengthening of Egypt's administrative systems. The pharaohs of this period, including Amenemhat I and Senusret I, instituted a series of reforms that centralized power, improved governance, and fostered economic prosperity. One of the key reforms was the creation of a professional bureaucracy. Pharaohs appointed officials known as viziers, who were responsible for managing the regions, overseeing construction projects, and collecting taxes. This allowed for a more efficient and organized administration. The Middle Kingdom also saw the expansion of trade routes, which brought Egypt into contact with neighboring regions, such as Nubia, the Levant, and the Sinai Peninsula. These trade networks brought valuable goods such as timber, lapis lazuli, and copper, further enriching Egypt's economy. Egypt's agricultural production also flourished during the Middle Kingdom, thanks to the restoration of the Nile's regular flooding. This allowed for the growth of crops in abundance, which supported both the population and the state's military efforts. Additionally, the Middle Kingdom saw the introduction of new farming techniques, including the use of irrigation and improved crop rotation methods, which helped sustain Egypt's agricultural economy. The expansion of Egyptian influence. Under the Middle Kingdom, Egypt's influence expanded beyond its borders, especially to the south in Nubia. The Egyptian pharaohs, particularly during the 12th dynasty, launched military campaigns to control the rich gold mines of Nubia and secure Egypt's southern frontier. The conquest of Nubia was not just for military and economic purposes. It was also driven by Egypt's desire to maintain control over strategic trade routes. The Middle Kingdom pharaohs established a series of military garrisons and fortresses along the Nile to secure their hold over Nubia. They also maintained diplomatic relations with neighboring regions, including the Levant and Syria. These military and diplomatic activities allowed Egypt to expand its influence in the eastern Mediterranean and control key trade routes. At the same time, Egypt's relationship with its northern neighbors became increasingly complex. The Middle Kingdom saw a series of diplomatic marriages between Egypt's royal family and the rulers of neighboring lands, including the Hittites and various Levantine city-states. These marriages were meant to solidify alliances and ensure peace along Egypt's borders. Cultural flourishing and religious change. The Middle Kingdom is often considered one of the high points of Egyptian culture. It was a period of artistic and literary achievement, with the creation of some of Egypt's greatest works of literature. One of the most famous literary texts from this period is the Instruction of Amenemhat, a piece of advice from the king to his son and successor, which reflects the concerns and values of the time, such as wisdom, loyalty, and the importance of maintaining ma'at. Religiously, the Middle Kingdom also saw a shift in the way the pharaoh was perceived. While the pharaoh continued to be seen as a divine ruler, the Middle Kingdom saw a rise in the influence of other gods and deities, especially Ammonius, who would eventually become the chief god of Egypt in the New Kingdom. Ammonius' cult grew in prominence during the Middle Kingdom, and the Temple of Karnak became one of the most important religious centers in Egypt. In terms of architecture, The Middle Kingdom saw the construction of grand temples and tombs, many of which were decorated with elaborate carvings and paintings. These tombs were not only for the pharaohs but also for high-ranking officials and nobles. Unlike the massive pyramids of the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom tombs were often cut into cliffs or built into rock faces. These tombs featured extensive inscriptions, which detailed the deceased's life, achievements, and journey to the afterlife. The decline of the Middle Kingdom. The Middle Kingdom eventually came to an end around 1650 BCE, primarily due to internal strife and external pressures. The political unity that had been achieved under the pharaohs began to deteriorate. Regional leaders once again gained power, leading to the disintegration of central authority. Meanwhile, external threats from neighboring peoples, particularly the Hyksos, a group of Asiatic people who had settled in the Nile Delta, began to challenge Egypt's stability. The Hyksos, over time, took control of the Delta region and established their own dynasty. This marked the beginning of the Second Intermediate Period, circa 1650 to 1550 BCE, a time of foreign rule and internal turmoil for Egypt. Despite this, the Middle Kingdom remains one of the most influential periods in Egyptian history, as it laid the foundation for the New Kingdom and many of the cultural, religious, and political practices that would define Egypt for centuries to come. The Second Intermediate Period and the rise of the New Kingdom. As the Middle Kingdom came to an end, Egypt entered another period of instability known as the Second Intermediate Period, circa 1650 to 1550 BCE. This era was marked by foreign invasions, political fragmentation, and the gradual rise of new powers, particularly the Hyksos, a Semitic-speaking people from the Near East. The Hyksos' rule over parts of Egypt would set the stage for the eventual emergence of the New Kingdom, a time of unprecedented power and wealth for Egypt. The Hyksos invasion and the Second Intermediate Period. The Hyksos were a group of Asiatic peoples who had settled in the Nile Delta and gradually gained influence. By around 1650 BCE, they had seized control of the northern part of Egypt, including the crucial city of Avaris. Their domination marked the beginning of the Second Intermediate Period, which was characterized by the division of Egypt into two regions: the Hyksos-controlled Delta in the north and the native Egyptian rulers in the south. The Hyksos introduced new technologies to Egypt, including the horse-drawn chariot, advanced weaponry, and improved fortifications. While their reign is often viewed as a time of foreign domination, the Hyksos' influence also contributed to the military advancements of Egypt. Their introduction of the chariot and better bronze weapons would prove invaluable to the pharaohs who would later drive them out. During this period, the native Egyptian rulers in the south, particularly in Thebes, began to resist the Hyksos occupation. Over time, the southern pharaohs, including Seqenenretau, Kamose, and finally Ahmose I, began to rally forces to expel the Hyksos from Egypt. This resistance culminated in the Hyksos expulsion, which would signal the end of the Second Intermediate Period and the beginning of the New Kingdom. The expulsion of the Hyksos and the birth of the New Kingdom. The driving force behind the expulsion of the Hyksos was Ahmose I, the founder of the 18th dynasty and the first pharaoh of the New Kingdom. Ahmose I, who reigned from around 1550 to 1525 BCE, led a series of military campaigns against the Hyksos, ultimately defeating them and driving them out of Egypt. Ahmose's victory was not just a military triumph, it also represented the restoration of Egypt's sovereignty and the reunification of the country under a strong central authority. With the expulsion of the Hyksos, Egypt entered a new era of power and prosperity, the New Kingdom. This period, which lasted from around 1550 BCE to 1070 BCE, is often regarded as the height of ancient Egypt's power, wealth, and cultural achievements. The New Kingdom would see Egypt expand its borders to unprecedented lengths, conquer vast territories, and become one of the most powerful empires of the ancient world. The rise of the New Kingdom, the Golden Age of Egypt. The New Kingdom was a time of extraordinary military, political, and cultural achievement. It is often divided into three main dynastic periods: the 18th dynasty, the 19th dynasty, and the 20th dynasty. Each of these dynasties produced powerful pharaohs who expanded Egypt's empire, built monumental structures, and established Egypt as a global superpower. Ahmose I, the first pharaoh of the New Kingdom, is credited with restoring Egypt to its former glory. Under his rule, Egypt's military strength was revitalized, and he began a series of campaigns to secure Egypt's borders, particularly in Nubia and the Levant. His military successes laid the foundation for the vast empire that would be built by his successors. After Ahmose, his descendants, particularly Thutmose I and Thutmose II, continued to expand Egypt's influence. However, it was under the reign of Thutmose III, often called the Napoleon of Egypt, that the new kingdom truly reached its zenith. Thutmose III reigned from 1479 to 1425 BCE and is known for his military genius and numerous campaigns in the Levant, Nubia, and even as far as Mesopotamia. His military campaigns expanded Egypt's empire to its largest territorial extent, and he established Egypt as the dominant power in the ancient Near East. The reign of Hatshepsut, a female pharaoh's legacy. Among the most famous rulers of the 18th dynasty was Hatshepsut, one of the few female pharaohs in Egyptian history. She reigned as regent for her stepson, Thutmose III, and later declared herself pharaoh. Her reign, which lasted from around 1479 to 1458 BCE, is remembered as a time of peace, prosperity, and monumental architectural achievements. Hatshepsut is best known for her extensive building projects, particularly the Temple of Deir el-Bahari, a stunning mortuary temple located on the west bank of the Nile near Thebes. The temple is considered one of the greatest architectural feats of ancient Egypt, and its design is unique in that it blends harmoniously with the surrounding cliffs. Hatshepsut also promoted trade expeditions, most famously the expedition to Punt, which brought back valuable resources such as incense, myrrh, and exotic animals. These trade missions helped strengthen Egypt's economy and solidified Hatshepsut's legacy as one of Egypt's most successful rulers. Although Hatshepsut was often depicted as a male pharaoh in her inscriptions, her reign was one of prosperity and stability. After her death, Thutmose III sought to erase her legacy from history, possibly due to the fact that she had usurped the throne. Her monuments were defaced, and her name was often removed from official records, but modern archaeology has restored much of her remarkable contributions. The height of Egypt's power under Ramesses II. The New Kingdom reached its peak under the reign of Ramesses II, circa 1279 to 1213 BCE, also known as Ramesses the Great. Ramesses II is often considered the most powerful and influential pharaoh of Egypt, known for his military prowess, extensive building programs, and long reign. One of his greatest achievements was the Battle of Kadesh, circa 1274 BCE, against the Hittites, one of Egypt's most powerful adversaries. While the battle itself was inconclusive, it led to the first known peace treaty in history, a diplomatic agreement that ensured Egypt's dominance in the region. Ramesses II also expanded Egypt's influence into Nubia, securing access to its wealth of resources, including gold, and further solidifying Egypt's empire. Ramesses II's reign is also famous for the construction of grand monuments, including the Ramesseum, his mortuary temple, and the colossal statues at Abu Simbel, two temples carved into a mountainside in Nubia. These structures were not only symbolic of his divine power, but also served as a testament to Egypt's wealth and architectural skill. The decline of the New Kingdom. Despite the grandeur of Ramesses II's reign, the New Kingdom began to experience a gradual decline following his death. Successive pharaohs struggled to maintain Egypt's territorial gains, and internal strife, economic challenges, and invasions from outside forces began to weaken the empire. The Sea Peoples, a mysterious group of marauding seafarers, attacked Egypt's borders during the reign of Ramesses III, contributing to the destabilization of the empire. By the end of the 20th dynasty, circa 1070 BCE, Egypt was no longer the superpower it had once been. Internal conflicts, economic difficulties, and foreign invasions would lead to the eventual fragmentation of Egypt and the start of the Third Intermediate Period. The Third Intermediate Period and the Late Period. Following the decline of the New Kingdom, Egypt entered a period of fragmentation, internal conflict, and foreign domination known as the Third Intermediate Period, c. 1070 to 664 BCE. This was a time marked by weak pharaohs, the rise of powerful priesthoods, and the increasing influence of foreign powers. Despite this, Egypt would experience brief moments of revival before being absorbed into the empires of its neighbors during the late period, 664 to 332 BCE. The third intermediate period, fragmentation and foreign rule. The collapse of the new kingdom left Egypt divided, with no single powerful ruler able to unite the country. The political instability led to the rise of regional rulers, often associated with the powerful priesthoods of the god Ammonius at Thebes. The most notable of these rulers were the Libyan dynasties, who controlled Lower Egypt and much of the Nile Delta, while Upper Egypt remained under the control of Theban priest kings. During this period, Egypt was no longer a unified empire. The role of the pharaoh, once central to Egyptian society, became increasingly ceremonial. Although pharaohs still held the title of ruler, much of the power rested in the hands of military leaders and priesthoods. These priest kings, particularly in Thebes, sought to assert their influence by controlling the resources of the temples and military forces. This internal division made it difficult for Egypt to defend itself against external threats. One of the significant foreign powers that began to influence Egypt during this period was the Nubians. The Nubians, who had long interacted with Egypt, eventually came to dominate Upper Egypt and established the 25th dynasty, c. 747 to 656 BCE. The Nubian pharaohs, such as Pi and Taharqa, sought to revive Egypt's former glory and re-establish the traditional Egyptian religious and cultural practices. However, their rule was often contested, both by local Egyptian forces and by invaders from the north. The Assyrians also began to exert influence over Egypt during this time. In the 7th century BCE, the Assyrians, under kings such as Tiglath-Pileser III and Esarhaddon, launched military campaigns into Egypt, eventually capturing parts of the Nile Delta. The Assyrians forced Egypt into a vassal relationship, though Egypt retained a degree of autonomy. This period of Assyrian domination, however, was brief. The late period, brief resurgences and foreign invasions. The late period began in 664 BCE, following the expulsion of the Assyrians by the 26th dynasty, founded by Psamtik I. This dynasty marked a brief resurgence of native Egyptian rule and a return to centralized control, albeit in a diminished form. Psamtik I and his successors managed to push the Assyrians out of Egypt, re-establishing the power of the pharaohs in both the north and south. Psamtik's reign was notable for his efforts to strengthen Egypt's economy and military, and he worked to secure Egypt's independence from external powers. During the 26th dynasty, Egypt enjoyed a brief period of stability and prosperity, known as the Sate Renaissance. The economy flourished thanks to trade with the Mediterranean, including Greece and Phoenicia, and Egypt saw a revival in art and architecture. Many of the traditional customs of the Old Kingdom were re-established, and there was a renewed focus on monumental building projects, including temples and tombs. The revival of the temples of Ammonius at Karnak and Luxor symbolized the reassertion of traditional religious practices. However, the 26th dynasty's rule was fragile, and internal divisions continued to plague Egypt. After the reign of Ahmesis II, 570 to 526 BCE, Egypt once again faced threats from external powers, particularly the Persians. The Persian conquest and the 27th dynasty. In 525 BCE, Egypt fell to the Persians under the command of Cambyses II, the son of Cyrus the Great. This marked the beginning of the 27th dynasty, c. 525 to 404 BCE, a period of Persian rule. The Persians controlled Egypt as a satrapy, and while the Persian kings maintained Egypt's political and administrative structure, they also imposed heavy taxes and military conscription. The Persian conquest of Egypt was not without resistance, however. Various Egyptian uprisings occurred during Persian rule, but they were typically suppressed. The most significant of these rebellions came in the late 5th century BCE when Amyrtius led an Egyptian revolt that successfully expelled the Persians from Egypt for a brief period. However, the Persians returned in 343 BCE under Artaxerxes III, re-establishing control over Egypt. During this period, Egypt's once thriving culture and economy began to deteriorate, and Egypt's role as a dominant power in the region was largely diminished. The decline of Egypt's native dynasties, combined with the ongoing Persian invasions, signified the end of the country's status as a major empire. The Macedonian conquest and the Hellenistic period. Egypt's long period of foreign domination came to a dramatic end in 332 BCE, when Alexander the Great arrived in Egypt after his conquest of Persia. Alexander was hailed as a liberator by the Egyptians, who had grown weary of Persian rule. After his victory over the Persians, Alexander visited the oracle of Ammonius at Siwa Oasis, where he was declared the son of Ammonius, cementing his divine status. Upon his death in 323 BCE, Alexander's empire was divided among his generals, and Egypt came under the control of Ptolemy I Soter, one of Alexander's trusted generals. The Ptolemaic dynasty, founded by Ptolemy I, would rule Egypt for nearly 300 years, ushering in the Hellenistic period. The Ptolemies, who were Greek in origin, ruled Egypt as a Greek colony, but they adopted many aspects of Egyptian culture, religion, and royal traditions. The most famous Ptolemaic ruler was Cleopatra VII, the last active pharaoh of Egypt. Cleopatra is remembered for her political acumen, her relationships with Roman leaders Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, and her attempt to restore Egypt's independence in the face of growing Roman power. However, following her defeat by the future Roman Emperor Octavian, later Augustus, in 31 BCE, Egypt was annexed by Rome, marking the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty and the final end of the Pharaonic period, the legacy of ancient Egypt and the end of the Pharaonic era. With the annexation of Egypt by Rome in 30 BCE, the era of the pharaohs officially came to an end. Egypt, now a Roman province, lost its independence and its ancient identity as a civilization ruled by its own kings and queens. However, while the political structure of Egypt was absorbed into the Roman Empire, its cultural, religious, and architectural legacy endured and continued to influence the world for centuries. The Roman period in Egypt. Under Roman rule, Egypt was considered one of the most valuable provinces in the empire due to its agricultural wealth, particularly its grain production, which fed much of the Roman world. Roman emperors established their own governance over Egypt, with a prefect appointed to oversee the province. The Romans respected Egyptian culture and religion to some extent, often adopting Egyptian gods and incorporating Egyptian art and symbolism into their own. While Egyptian identity as a sovereign civilization may have been extinguished, many of the ancient customs, including the worship of Egyptian gods like Isis, Osiris, and Horus, continued to thrive in the Roman world. The cult of Isis, for example, became a significant religious movement throughout the Mediterranean. Additionally, Egypt remained a center of learning, particularly in the fields of astronomy, medicine, and philosophy, contributing to the intellectual life of the ancient world. Though the traditional Egyptian system of writing hieroglyphs faded from common use, the Egyptian language lived on for some time as the Coptic language. Coptic Christianity, which emerged in Egypt during the early centuries of the Common Era, preserved many aspects of Egyptian culture, particularly in the arts and rituals. The lasting impact of ancient Egypt on the world. Even after Egypt's incorporation into the Roman Empire, the civilization's achievements continued to resonate throughout history. The pyramids of Giza, the Sphinx, and other monumental structures stand as symbols of Egypt's architectural and engineering marvels. These structures were not only engineering feats but also expressions of Egypt's deep religious and cultural beliefs. As the Egyptians believed in the divine nature of their kings and the afterlife, the ancient Egyptians' advances in writing, mathematics, and medicine had a lasting impact on later civilizations. The Egyptian system of writing, particularly hieroglyphs, influenced the development of other ancient writing systems. Egyptian innovations in medicine, particularly their surgical techniques and knowledge of anatomy, would later contribute to the advancement of medicine in both Greek and Roman traditions. In art and culture, the Egyptian style continued to inspire generations of artists, architects, and scholars. The Art Deco movement of the 1920s, for example, was heavily influenced by the clean lines and geometric forms of ancient Egyptian design. Moreover, the discovery of the Rosetta Stone in 1799, which allowed scholars to decipher hieroglyphs, revived interest in Egyptology and opened the door to understanding the rich history and culture of ancient Egypt. Egypt's cultural and religious influence on later civilizations. Ancient Egypt's influence on the development of the Mediterranean world cannot be overstated. Many of the concepts, myths, and religious practices that originated in Egypt were adopted by surrounding cultures. Greek philosophers such as Plato and Herodotus visited Egypt and were greatly influenced by Egyptian thought. Plato, for instance, was fascinated by Egyptian notions of the afterlife and justice, which he incorporated into his own philosophy. The Egyptians' beliefs in Ma'at, the concept of cosmic order and justice, and the afterlife deeply influenced the philosophical and ethical systems of the ancient world. In particular, the concept of an eternal soul and divine judgment found in Egyptian religious beliefs would shape later ideas in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The Egyptian concept of the afterlife and judgment of the soul would be foundational for the Christian and Islamic eschatological visions. The discovery and rediscovery of ancient Egypt. In modern times, Egypt's ancient past has been rediscovered and studied in greater depth. The field of Egyptology emerged as scholars and archaeologists began to unearth and study Egypt's ancient monuments and artifacts. The 19th century saw the opening of Egypt's tombs and the uncovering of the treasures of the Valley of the Kings, the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 by Howard Carter being one of the most famous events in archaeological history. In the modern era, Egypt has become a center for tourists and scholars alike. The preservation of Egypt's ancient monuments, temples, and tombs, especially the pyramids, ensures that the legacy of one of the world's most enduring civilizations remains intact. The Egyptian Museum in Cairo houses one of the world's greatest collections of ancient Egyptian artifacts, providing visitors with an opportunity to learn about the history, culture, and achievements of the ancient Egyptians. Egypt in the modern world, a bridge between the past and the future. Today, Egypt stands as a modern nation that bridges the gap between the ancient world and the contemporary era. Cairo, with its bustling streets and vibrant culture, is one of the most populous cities in the Middle East, while still being home to some of the most iconic relics of ancient Egypt. The modern Egyptian state has made significant strides in preserving its ancient heritage while developing into a contemporary society. The legacy of ancient Egypt continues to shape global culture. From art and architecture to literature and religion, Egypt's influence is far-reaching. The Nile River, central to the development of ancient Egypt, remains a vital lifeline for modern Egyptians, and its cultural significance endures. Conclusion: the eternal legacy of ancient Egypt. In the end, the history of Egypt is not just the story of a civilization that once ruled the ancient world. It is the story of a culture that laid the foundations for much of what the modern world knows today. From the construction of the pyramids to the writing of sacred texts, from the discovery of mathematics to the practice of medicine, the achievements of ancient Egypt remain as relevant today as they were thousands of years ago. Though Egypt may no longer be ruled by pharaohs, the echoes of its past continue to inspire awe and wonder in all who study its history. As we look at the pyramids, the temples, and the hieroglyphs, we are reminded that the ancient Egyptians built not just for their time but for all time. Their legacy is a testament to the enduring power of human creativity, intellect, and ambition. Ancient Egypt's history is not just a chapter in the past. It's a continuing influence that transcends time, offering insights into the cultures, civilizations, and societies that followed. And as long as we continue to look to the stars, reflect on the power of the gods, and explore the mysteries of the ancient world, the spirit of Egypt will never fade.